I've never felt entirely comfortable being in a group. From a young age, I always felt better having one on one conversations. The preference used to manifest as social anxiety, trying to manage different versions of myself in different situations. But as I've become more comfortable with myself, I realized that the cause for feeling uncomfortable in groups was all centered around one thing: the overwhelming power of a specific culture, a culture that I didn't fully belong to or have much influence over. Whenever people organize, a culture forms. Often the culture adopts things from a larger existing culture, and often the rules of the culture are dictated by people who are most confident about their ideas. If the community has enough emotional maturity among the members, the people whose words and actions are consistent can have more influence on the culture and form its backbone. Not all cultures are emotionally mature, though. We tend to underestimate just how many cultures exist and how many cultures we belong to because so many of the cultures we belong to overlap. We also overemphasize the cultures that are associated with nationality, ethnicity, and religion. Culture that centers around subcultures and styles gets some attention, but cultures that center around small groups of people often get ignored because it doesn't translate into simple terms that everyone can understand. We have labels to describe a lot of the larger cultures, but we don't have a way to express the smaller cultures to people that don't know those cultures. The labels that we use to describe larger cultures aren't inherently bad, but we don't usually catch how much they oversimplify things and how easy it is to fall into a trap of misunderstanding. Then we miss someone's unique and individual culture when we label them. There's always a lot of variety, even within a common label, and people end up interpreting a label differently depending on which subculture they interact with or which subculture they interact with. Culture is a beautiful thing when we recognize it as culture. If we mistake the rules of our culture as absolute rules for how to live, and we expect other people to adopt the same rules, or if we fail to challenge those rules, it can become destructive or a tool for control. This is where my discomfort with groups comes from. The lack of a bird's eye view, an overly confident feeling in the social norms of a group without each individual testing them or challenging them for themselves. The lack of effort to accept other ways of seeing the world. It's not that we need to accept anything and everything, but I always felt it was healthier to at least make an effort to consider what might be positive about other cultures and also what might be negative about our own culture. Once again, this is not just about countries or ethnic groups or religions. I'm talking about different value systems within the same country or the same religion, or just having different priorities in life. Some people or groups value formal education and some value self-motivation. Some value time with family, others value having some kind of vision. Some value art that a majority of people appreciate, and others value art that's challenging to people. This is all part of our individual culture and group culture as well. Challenging the norms of a culture doesn't have to be a conflict or a fight. I feel that it's best when it doesn't feel like a battle at all. It doesn't have to be done outwardly or in opposition to the group. We can do that questioning to ourselves in private or among people that we trust. I think the healthiest thing overall is to just behave the way that feels right to us. This sometimes will turn into a conflict because people derive power from the rules of a culture, and a change in the rules threatens power. It can also feel threatening to some members of the group because if the rules change enough, it will lead to the dissolving of a culture, and oftentimes there are beautiful aspects to that culture, and we don't want to lose those things. Sometimes these things are so subtle and hard to express that we don't even notice them until we feel that the culture is starting to disappear. Emotional maturity is important because it lets us find our value that's independent of our culture. We don't need the culture in order to find a sense of self-worth. If we value ourselves outside of our culture, we don't cling as blindly to things, and we can compromise more on culture that benefits everyone instead of trying to use culture to maintain control over other people. Emotional maturity means having a sense of value that's independent of any culture or group, but also being able to consider the thoughts and feelings of other people. It's the ability to value ourselves, but also constantly challenge ourselves. People cling desperately to those cultures when they don't feel any self-worth outside of those cultures. In some cases, they don't even know what it means to find their own value. I didn't know what that looked like either, but I knew there were some things I disagreed with in the cultures around me from a young age, and it made me want to explore outside of those cultures. I remember trying to follow the trends among suburban middle school kids in my town and feeling really exhausted trying to keep up with them. One week it was South Park, and the next was yo-yos. Then it was some kind of soccer shoes or NBA team pencils. Some of the trends I actually liked, and some I thought were pretty dumb. But either way, I did my best to keep up with them. If I hadn't at that age, it would have led to me being completely ostracized, and actually did. If you had enough charisma, you could get away with not following the rules. Sometimes you might even be able to change them, but I didn't have that kind of charisma, so I followed along for a while until I got tired and I stopped worrying about what my classmates thought. I ended up suffering for it, and I was bullied for a little while. It wasn't that long before the bullies stopped because I never questioned my value. I questioned theirs, and this kind of threw them off guard. I explored and ended up into things that by chance they would later come to value. I found my way to the local punk, ska, and emo shows, and when those shows became popular among the cool kids, then suddenly I was cool again. Of course, I didn't really care that much about that, so I just kept exploring. I felt more excited about the friends I was meeting from other towns with totally different cultures. I remember other instances of feeling frustrated with the dominant culture around me in high school. Lots of people insisted that boys and girls couldn't be platonic friends, that deep down some sort of physical attraction was involved, and I completely disagreed with them. 2 or 3 of my favorite people were girls, and I didn't have romantic feelings for them, and I assume at least 2 out of 3 didn't have romantic feelings for me either. Rumors spread about us, and it ended up complicating our friendship at some point. I've seen this kind of thing happen in completely different cultures around the world. There are multiple mainstream narratives with their own rules, and people are villainized or ostracized for challenging those norms. If they're extremely tough and calm, they might be able to weather those attacks, but if they can't remain totally composed, they end up isolated, cancelled, or running to the opposing culture and becoming reactionary against the culture that kicked them out. My solution to this has been to get involved in as many cultures as I can. Of course, some feel more comfortable to me than others, but I challenge myself in order to grow, and so I make alliances with people from a huge variety of different cultures. And that includes different politics and different value systems, and also completely different hobbies and interests. I can't take my own views too personally because if I'm eager to get into a debate with people, then it makes it harder to connect with them. I have to remember that I don't know everything, and that sometimes it's not worth starting a fight just so I can learn what's motivating other people. And a lot of times I learn something and I find myself growing because of it. Some cultures are much more difficult than others to connect with, and some have a conflict of interest with other cultures. But there are always people within those groups that break certain trends, and so you can find people that are more willing to connect. There are all kinds of varieties of people you'd call high society or working class, and tons of different cultures in between. Depending on which culture you're part of, you might have certain stereotypes about people in another income level or people who have certain professions. I won't even say it's unfair to make those stereotypes, but I think it's healthy and mature to constantly look for people that break our stereotypes within those groups that we tend to stereotype. You can always find them. There's also a lot of things we can't see about a culture from outside of it, and it leads to all kinds of misunderstandings. I try to know as many people as I can from different income groups and lifestyle choices and value systems, and I build trust with as many people as I can. I don't force it. I build it from the ground up. We start small, and slowly over time through communication, we learn to trust each other. I listen to the thought process of both people who practice polyamory and experimental relationships and people with the most traditional marriages. People who follow strict gender norms, and then people who don't want to follow any gender norms at all. I talk to people who are homeless and people who are richer than most people can imagine. Some people value family more than anything, and others don't really care about family at all. I know some people who just want to enjoy their life, and other people who are worried most about financial stability and think it's a prerequisite for happiness. I don't agree with everyone on their values and lifestyle, but I know that people are complex and that there's always things I don't understand, so I want to maintain good relationships with whoever I can. This is selfish and it's selfless. By building relationships with people who think differently from me, I can understand more about the world and see past my own biases. I also feel that this is how we build a better world, through listening as much as we can and seeing that nothing is as simple as a label. I have certain family members whose face lights up when they find out that my friend is a doctor, and they might look a little more concerned when another friend is a construction worker or a digital nomad. I try to remind them of their unique characteristics and what attracts me to these people, which is rarely their occupation or whatever that stereotype tends to be. And hopefully they can see that these people aren't necessarily what they assume them to be from their occupation. We oversimplify things to save time and energy, but the more we appreciate diversity among different types of people, the more we can pick and choose the things that we feel are positive. We can choose things from a wide variety to create our own culture, which is more in line with the kind of world that we want to live in or what we want to build or promote. The more positive interactions between different kinds of cultures, the more peaceful and pleasant the world will be.